Trump just threatened to invade a NATO ally, military force against Denmark, to steal Greenland. And Canada's response? They didn't issue a diplomatic statement. They didn't call for calm. They flew to Paris, stood beside Denmark's Prime Minister, and told Trump to back off. Then they opened a consulate in Greenland specifically to block American annexation. What happened next wasn't just a diplomatic embarrassment for Trump. It was the end of American dominance in the Arctic. 7 NATO allies turned against the United States. Europe chose Denmark over America. And the entire Arctic security structure that America controlled for decades? Gone. Replaced by a coalition that deliberately excludes Washington. For decades, Arctic geopolitics operated on an unspoken understanding. The United States was the dominant power. NATO allies like Canada and Denmark deferred to American leadership. Russia was the adversary everyone coordinated against. And Greenland existed in comfortable limbo as Danish territory with American military presence. Then Trump decided Greenland should belong to the United States. Greenland is enormous. 2 million square kilometers, home to 56,000 people, mostly Inuit, strategically invaluable, sitting between North America and Europe with direct access to Arctic shipping routes. The U.S. maintains Thule space base there, critical for North American missile defense, and Greenland holds massive rare earth mineral deposits worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Trump's interest isn't new. He floated buying Greenland during his first presidency. Denmark declined. He dropped it. But this time, he appointed a special envoy explicitly to make Greenland part of the United States. The White House declared military force was always an option for annexing Danish territory. Denmark heard something different. The United States cannot be trusted to respect its allies' sovereignty. If America will threaten Denmark over Greenland, no NATO ally is secure from American territorial ambitions. Most Canadian prime ministers would have tried diplomatic hedging, express concern, call for dialogue, avoid choosing sides, try to maintain relationships with both. Mark Carney did the opposite. He publicly sided with Denmark against the United States. He used the phrase solely by the people of Denmark and Greenland, language that directly rejects any American claim. He announced Canada is opening a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, in February, a concrete action backing Denmark. And critically, he's sending Governor-General Mary Simon to Greenland. Simon is in Nuuk. She previously served as Canada's ambassador for circumpolar affairs and ambassador to Denmark. Her presence sends multiple messages. Canada recognizes Indigenous Greenlanders' right to self-determination. Canada has deep Arctic ties through Indigenous peoples. Canada is not deferring to American leadership on Arctic Indigenous issues. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand will accompany Simon to open the consulate. This isn't a symbolic gesture. This is cabinet-level diplomatic engagement explicitly supporting Denmark, while Trump is threatening annexation. Carney's language was careful but unmistakable. He emphasized self-determination of nations, sovereignty, territorial integrity as basic principles. He said Canada will always support Denmark's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which includes Greenland. Every word was chosen to contradict Trump's position. Self-determination means Greenlanders decide, not Americans. Sovereignty means Denmark's authority is legitimate, not negotiable. Territorial integrity means borders cannot be changed by force or threats. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen recognized exactly what Carney was doing. She thanked him for being very clear in your statement when it comes to respect for national sovereignty. She emphasized both countries are working together to secure the Arctic region, and together with all our NATO allies, we can secure the region. Notice the phrasing. All our NATO allies, not led by the United States. Together as equals with sovereignty respected. Carney wasn't alone. France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom issued a joint letter with Denmark and Canada defending Greenland's status. The language was direct. Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland and them only to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. This is extraordinary. 7 NATO allies publicly rejecting American territorial claims against another NATO member. No diplomatic hedging, no attempts to find middle ground, just flat rejection of American demands. The European response sent a clear message. Trump's threats to Greenland are being treated as threats to NATO itself. Frederiksen warned explicitly that American annexation of Greenland would spell the end of NATO. European leaders are taking that warning seriously. Trump assumed European allies would stay quiet or offer token objections while ultimately deferring to American power. Instead, they coordinated a unified response that isolates the United States diplomatically. And Canada is at the center of that coordination. Carney met privately with Frederickson in Paris before the Ukraine Security Summit. They used that bilateral meeting to coordinate Arctic security approaches that explicitly exclude American territorial ambitions. The signal is unmistakable. Canada and Europe are building Arctic security cooperation that works around American demands rather than following American leadership. For decades, Arctic security meant American leadership with allies following. The United States had the largest military presence, the most bases, the dominant strategic position. NATO Arctic policy was effectively American Arctic policy with consultation. That model just collapsed. When the United States threatens to annex Allied territory, allies stop trusting American leadership. They start coordinating independently. They build partnerships that exclude the threatening power. Carney and Frederickson emphasized working together as NATO allies to secure the Arctic region, but they conspicuously did not mention American leadership or coordination with Washington. The subtext is clear. Canada and Denmark will work with European NATO members on Arctic security, and the United States is no longer assumed to be leading that coordination. Canada is also deepening Arctic ties with Nordic countries. Finland and Sweden recently joined NATO, bringing serious Arctic capabilities. Norway has extensive Arctic experience. Iceland provides strategic positioning. Combined with Denmark and Greenland, there's an emerging Nordic-Canadian Arctic bloc, coordinating independently of the United States. This bloc controls critical Arctic geography. Greenland commands the North Atlantic approaches. Iceland sits astride key shipping lanes. Norway monitors the Barents Sea. Canada owns the Northwest Passage and Hudson Bay approaches. Finland and Sweden add Baltic and northern Scandinavian coverage. If these countries coordinate Arctic security without American leadership, the United States loses its dominant position in the region. Not because of military defeat, but because allies simply chose to work around American aggression. Sending Mary Simon to Greenland was brilliant strategic positioning. Greenland's population is predominantly Inuit. Canada's Governor-General is Inuk. The message is that Arctic indigenous peoples have transnational connections that transcend state borders. If Trump tries to annex Greenland against the will of its indigenous population, he's not just violating Danish sovereignty, he's attacking indigenous self-determination. And Canada is signaling that indigenous Arctic peoples will have Canadian support against American aggression. This resonates powerfully in Greenland. Greenlanders have spent decades building autonomy from Denmark while maintaining the relationship. They're proud of their indigenous identity and protective of their self-governance. American threats to simply absorb Greenland into the United States ignore and insult that indigenous identity. Simon's visit says Canada recognizes Greenlandic indigenous rights. Canada respects indigenous self-determination. Canada stands with Arctic indigenous peoples against external threats to their sovereignty. Trump wanted Greenland. Instead, he got a unified European rejection of American territorial demands. 7 NATO allies publicly opposing the United States on territorial sovereignty. Denmark threatening that American annexation would end NATO. Canada opening diplomatic facilities in Greenland specifically to support Danish sovereignty. He also triggered exactly the kind of independent Arctic security coordination that undermines American regional dominance. Canada, Denmark, Nordic countries working together without deferring to American leadership. Indigenous Arctic networks that transcend state boundaries and reject American claims. European allies treating American Arctic ambitions as threats rather than proposals to accommodate. And he lost trust. Frederickson, Carney, and European leaders now know the United States under Trump will threaten Allied territory. That changes everything about how they approach security cooperation. If America threatens Denmark over Greenland, Canada has to consider whether America might someday threaten Canadian Arctic sovereignty. European countries have to plan for American unreliability on fundamental issues like territorial integrity. The damage isn't reversible by backing down or softening rhetoric. The trust that NATO allies would respect each other's sovereignty is broken. And once broken, it doesn't heal just because the threat temporarily recedes. What comes next is Canada and European allies building Arctic security architecture that assumes American unreliability. Joint exercises between Canada, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Coordinated Arctic patrol programs that don't include the United States. Intelligence sharing networks that treat American demands with skepticism. Infrastructure coordination follows similar patterns. Churchill port development with European partnerships. Arctic shipping route management between Canada and Nordic countries. Critical minerals supply chains structured around Canada-Europe cooperation without American intermediaries. The economic implications are substantial. If Canada coordinates Arctic resource development with Europe and Nordic countries instead of the United States, American companies lose access and influence. Rare earth minerals from Greenland, critical minerals from Canadian Arctic, shipping through Northwest Passage, all potentially structured through partnerships that bypass American involvement. And the precedent matters globally. Other allies watching Trump threaten Denmark learn that American security guarantees are unreliable. If the United States will threaten NATO allies over territorial disputes, what value is the alliance? Countries start building alternative security arrangements that don't depend on American commitment. Trump wanted to demonstrate American power by claiming Greenland. He demonstrated American unreliability. And Carney ensured that demonstration was unmistakable by publicly siding with Denmark, coordinating with European allies, and building Arctic partnerships that explicitly exclude American territorial ambitions. Greenland isn't becoming American territory, but the Arctic just became a region where American leadership is optional rather than automatic. And that shift from American dominance to multilateral coordination without American control is the real strategic loss Trump's threats created. Canada chose Denmark. Europe backed that choice. And the Arctic just became a place where the United States no longer assumes allies will follow its demands. Trump is shut out. Not by military force, not by economic pressure, by allies simply deciding they'd rather coordinate without him and discovering they can. The Arctic power shift is complete. And Trump did it to himself.